Hi everyone, it's Jigoku-ren. So I just finished recording and editing this new audiobook. I previously did Nichiren's The Opening of the Eyes, also called Kaimokusho. This time I'm doing Rissho Ankoku Ron, also called On Securing the Peace of the Land Through the Propagation of True Buddhism, or some variation thereof. So this piece is going to be a little bit different than the last one I did. This one's actually Nichiren's first major work. It was written with the intent to send to the shogunate government at the time, which was the Kamakura shogunate. And in contrast to The Opening of the Eyes, it was written with the intent of going after specifically the Pure Land school, which at the time of this piece's writing was influenced mostly by the writings of a priest named Honen. In modern day, the most popular of the Pure Land schools in Japan is called Jodo Shinshu, which was influenced more by one of Honen's students, a man by the name of Shinran. But you will notice that his name is absent from this work because he was not as well known back then. He was a contemporary of Nichiren, but I don't believe the two were in similar locations to each other, so Nichiren probably did not know about Shinran's work. Regardless, the intent behind this work was to get the government basically to ban the practice and spread of the Pure Land teachings. And when I say Pure Land teachings, I mean specifically the doctrines put forth by Honen, which were, in Nichiren's time, starting to be adopted by the older schools like Tendai and Shingon. Not really the Pure Land Sutras themselves, which Nichiren saw as actual teachings of the Buddha, but provisional teachings in comparison to the Lotus Sutra, which is something he will explain in this book. And this was all because, as Nichiren will describe in this piece, he believed that it was contributing to the natural disasters and all the misfortune that Japan was experiencing at the time. Nowadays, there's a tendency to kind of view Buddhism through a very secular and non-mystic lens. But back then, the mentality within Japanese Buddhism was very different than what it is now. It was far more supernaturally oriented. So a lot of the things that he says in this about how these disasters are coming because we've accepted this incorrect doctrine, a lot of people would disagree with that today, even people within the Buddhist clergies. But you have to understand that this is how people thought back then. And this would have been a very convincing argument to those people. Of course, this work didn't convince the government officials. It probably convinced other people, but the government officials not so much. Nichiren failed ultimately to reform the schools of Tendai and Shingon and convince them to reject the Pure Land and Zen influence. And in the end, he basically formed his own school of Buddhism, although that school really wouldn't be formalized until after his passing. But this is basically the origin of the Nichiren school of Buddhism, which is now currently still very popular in Japan. You will notice that he makes frequent reference to the country of Japan being invaded by foreign nations, and this did manifest in the form of the Mongols invading Japan, which Nichiren saw as kind of the fulfillment of this prophecy that he's recounting in this tale. As some of you may already be aware, that invasion ended up failing, which kind of thwarted this entire narrative that he was weaving around this cataclysmic invasion that would destroy the country. But even despite that, he did manage to accrue a lot of followers during his time and posthumously, especially through his writing, which became very influential in the Buddhist world. And after his passing, a lot of his followers collected all of the writings they could find and compiled them into what we now think of as the collected writings of Nichiren, which is why we have them now available to make audiobooks out of. And if you think about it, it is really kind of amazing that we have so many of these surviving works by such a major religious figure, many of which we do have surviving copies written in his handwriting, which is just fascinating. Unlike a lot of those other writings, this work is written in the form of a narrative, and it's basically a dialogue between a man who is a guest at another man's house, and this guest is meant to be probably your average Buddhist for Nichiren's time, your average Pure Land believer, who's probably not super versed in the doctrines of Pure Land, but has kind of a general understanding of it. Meanwhile, the master is meant to obviously represent Nichiren himself, who has done all this work exploring the sutras and has created this theological argument against Pure Land Buddhism, specifically the kind that Honen advocated for. He does reference a lot of passages from Honen's work, the Senchaku Shu. Like my last recording, I tried to put some emotion into this to kind of really give life to Nichiren's more emotional and hard-hitting writing style. But I've put even a little more emotion into this one because it's meant to be a dialogue, so there's a story going on with people's emotions flaring up and such. So it's not going to be just a straight reading of the treatise. I'm also appending to the end a shorter letter called Rationale for Submitting the Rissho Ankoku Ron. And this is just to provide a little more context to, well, Nichiren's reasons for writing it, as the title describes. So this is going to give a little context and backstory behind the main body of this audiobook. So with all this said, I hope you enjoy. Rissho Ankoku Ron, or On Securing the Peace of the Land Through the Propagation of True Buddhism, by Nichiren Daishonin. Once there was a traveler who spoke these words in sorrow to his host. In recent years, there are unnatural disturbances in the heavens, strange occurrences on earth, famine and pestilence, all affecting every corner of the empire and spreading throughout the land. Oxen and horses lie dead in the streets. The bones of the stricken crowd the highways. Over half the population has already been carried off by death, and in every family someone grieves. All the while, some put their whole faith in the sharp sword of the Buddha Amida, and intone this name of the Lord of the Western Paradise. Others believe that the Buddha Yakushi will heal all ills, and recite this sutra that describes him as the Tathagata of the Eastern region. Some put their trust in the passage in the Lotus Sutra that says, quote, illness will vanish immediately and he will find perpetual youth and eternal life, end quote, pay homage to the wonderful words of that sutra. Others, citing the passage in the Nino Sutra that reads, quote, the 7 difficulties vanish, the 7 blessings at once appear, end quote, conduct ceremonies at which 100 preachers expound that sutra in 100 places. There are those who follow the secret teachings of the Shingon sect and conduct rituals by filling 5 jars with water, and others who devote themselves entirely to Zen-type meditation and perceive the emptiness of all phenomena as clearly as the moon. Some write out the names of the 7 guardian spirits and paste them on 1,000 gates. Others paint pictures of the 5 mighty bodhisattvas and hang them over 10,000 thresholds. And still others pray to the gods of heaven and the deities of earth in ceremonies conducted at the 4 corners of the capital and on the 4 boundaries of the nation. Others, taking pity on the plight of the common people, make certain that government on the national and local levels is carried out in a benevolent manner. But despite all of these efforts, they merely exhaust themselves in vain. Famine and disease rage more fiercely than ever. Beggars are everywhere in sight, and scenes of death fill our eyes. Cadavers pile up in mounds like observation platforms, dead bodies lie side by side like planks on a bridge. If we look about, we find that the sun and moon continue to move in their accustomed orbits, and the 5 planets follow the proper course. The 3 treasures of Buddhism continue to exist, and the period of 100 reigns, during which the Bodhisattva Hachiman vowed to protect the nation, has not expired. Then why is it that the world has already fallen into decline, and that the laws of the state have come to an end? What is wrong? What error has been committed? The host then spoke. I have been brooding alone upon this matter, indignant in my heart, but now that you have come, we can lament together. Let us discuss the question at length. When a man leaves family life and enters the Buddhist way, it is because he hopes to attain Buddhahood through the teachings of the Dharma. But attempts now to move the gods fail to have any effect, and appeals to the power of the Buddhas produce no results. When I observe carefully the state of the world today, I see ignorant people who give way to doubts because of their naivete. Therefore, they look up to the heavens and mouth their resentment, or gaze down at the earth and sink deep into anxiety. I have pondered the matter carefully with what limited resources I possess, and have searched rather widely in the scriptures for an answer. The people of today all turn their backs upon what is right. To a man, they give their allegiance to evil. That is the reason why the benevolent deities have abandoned the nation, why sages leave and do not return. And in their stead come devils and demons, disasters and calamities, that arise one after another. I cannot keep silent on this matter. I cannot suppress my fears. The guest said, these disasters that befall the empire, these calamities of the nation, I am not the only one pained by them. The whole populace is weighed down with sorrow. Now I have been privileged to enter your home and to listen to these enlightening words of yours. You speak of the gods and sages taking leave and of disasters and calamities arising side by side. Upon what sutras do you base your views? Could you describe for me the passages of proof? The host said, there are numerous passages that could be cited in a wide variety of proofs. For example, in the Konko Myo Sutra, we read, quote, the 4 heavenly kings said to the Buddha, though this sutra exists in the nation, the rulers have never allowed it to be propagated. In their hearts they turn away from it, and they take no pleasure in hearing its teachings. They do not serve it, respect it, or sing its praises. Nor are they willing to respect or give material support to the 4 kinds of Buddhists who embrace the sutra. In the end, they have made it impossible for us and the countless other heavenly beings who are our followers to hear the teachings of this profound and wonderful Dharma. They have deprived us of the sweet dew of its words and cut us off from the flow of the true law, so that our majesty and strength are drained away. Thus, the number of beings who occupy the 4 evil paths increases, and the number who enjoy the human and heavenly states decreases. People fall into the river of birth and death and turn their backs on the road to nirvana. World-honored one, we, the 4 heavenly kings, as well as our various followers and the yakshas and other beings, observing this state of affairs, have decided to abandon this nation, for we have no more heart to protect it. And it is not we alone who cast aside these rulers. All the great benevolent deities who guard and watch over the countless different regions of the country will also invariably reject them. And once we and the others have abandoned and deserted this nation, then many different types of disasters will occur in the country and the rulers will fall from power. Not a single person in the entire population will possess a heart of goodness. There will be nothing but binding and enslaving, killing and injuring, anger and contention. Men will slander each other or fawn upon one another, and the laws will be twisted until even the innocent are made to suffer. Pestilence will become rampant. Comets will appear again and again. 2 suns will come forth side by side, and eclipses will occur with unaccustomed frequency. Black arcs and white arcs will span the sky as harbingers of ill fortune. Stars will fall, the earth will shake, and noises will issue from the wells. Torrential rains and violent winds will come out of season, and there will be constant famine, and grains and fruits will not ripen. Marauders from many other regions will invade and plunder the nation. The people will suffer all manner of pain and affliction, and there will be no place where one may live in safety." End quote. The Daishonin Sutra says, quote, "When the principles of Buddhism truly become obscured and lost, then people will all let their beards, hair, and fingernails grow long, and the laws of the world will be forgotten and ignored. At that time, loud noises will sound in the air and the earth will shake. Everything in the world will begin to move as though it were a water wheel. City walls will split and tumble, and all houses and dwellings will collapse. Roots, branches, leaves, petals, and fruits will lose their medicinal properties. With the exception of the 5 highest heavens in the world of form, all the regions of the worlds of form and desire will become deprived of the 7 flavors and the 3 essences that nourish life in human society, until nothing remains alive anymore. All the good discourses that lead men to emancipation will at this time disappear. The flowers and fruits that grow in the earth will become few and will lose their flavor and sweetness. The wells, springs, and ponds will all go dry. The lands everywhere will turn brackish and will crack open and warp into hillocks and gullies, and the mountains will be swept by fire, and the heavenly dragons will no longer send down rain. The crops will all wither and die, all living creatures will perish, and even the grass will cease to grow anymore. Dust will rain down until all is darkness, and the sun and moon no longer shed their light. All the 4 directions will be afflicted by drought, and evil omens will appear again and again. The 10 kinds of evil behavior will increase greatly, particularly greed, anger, and stupidity, and people will think no more of their fathers and mothers than does the roe deer. Living beings will decline in numbers, in longevity, physical power, and enjoyment. They will become estranged from the pleasures of human and heavenly existence, and all will fall into the evil states of existence. The wicked rulers and monks who perform these 10 kinds of evil behavior will destroy the true law of the Buddha and make it impossible for sentient beings to be born in the human and heavenly states of existence. At that time, the various benevolent deities and heavenly rulers who would ordinarily take pity on living beings will abandon this nation of confusion and evil, and all will make their way to other regions." End quote. The Ninno Sutra states, quote, "When a nation becomes disordered, it is the spirits which first show signs of rampancy. Because these spirits become rampant, all the people of the nation become disordered. Invaders come to plunder the country, and the common people face annihilation. The ruler, the high ministers, their heir apparent, and the other princes and government officials all quarrel with each other over right and wrong. Heaven and earth manifest prodigies and strange occurrences. The 28 constellations, the stars, the sun, and the moon appear at irregular times and in irregular positions, and numerous outlaws rise up." End quote. The same sutra also states, quote, "When I look at the 3 ages of the past, present, and future with the 5 types of vision, I see that all the rulers of nations were able to attain the position of emperor or king because in past existences they served 500 Buddhas. And this is the reason that all the various sages and arhats are born in their nations and are assisting them to gain great advantage. But if a time should come when the good fortune of these rulers runs out, then all the sages will abandon them and depart. And once the sages have departed, then the 7 disasters are certain to arise." End quote. The Yakushi Sutra states, quote, "If disasters and calamities should befall members of the ruling Kshatriya class and anointed kings, such disasters will be as follows. The calamity of disease and pestilence among the populace. The calamity of invasion and plunder from foreign lands. The calamity of revolt within one's own domain. the calamity of irregularities and strange occurrences among the stars and constellations, the calamity of eclipses of the sun and moon, the calamity of unseasonable wind and rain, and the calamity of rain that fails to fall even when the season for it has come and gone." End quote. In the Nino Sutra, the Buddha addresses King Prasenajit in these words, quote, "Great King, the region where my teachings now hold sway consists of 100 billion Sumeru worlds, with 100 billion suns and moons. Each of these Sumeru worlds comprises 4 great continents. In the Empire of the South, which is Jambudvipa, there are 16 great nations, 500 medium-sized nations, and 10,000 small nations. In these nations, there are 7 types of fearful calamities that may occur. All the rulers of these nations agree that these are indeed calamities. What, then, are these calamities? When the sun and moon depart from their regular courses, when the seasons come in the wrong order, when a red sun or a black sun appears, when 2, 3, 4, or 5 suns appear at the same time, when the sun is eclipsed and loses its light, or when 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 coronas appear around the sun. This is the first calamity. When the 28 constellations do not move in their regular courses, when the metal star, the broom star, the wheel star, the demon star, the fire star, the water star, the wind star, the ladle star, the southern dipper, the northern dipper, the great stars of the 5 garrisons, and all the many stars that govern the ruler, the 3 high ministers, and the 100 other officials. When each of these stars manifests some peculiar behavior, this is the second calamity. When huge fires consume the nation, and the people are all burned to death, or when there are outbreaks of demon fire, dragon fire, heavenly fire, mountain god fire, human fire, tree fire, or bandit fire. When these prodigies appear, this is the third calamity. When huge floods drown the population, when the seasons come out of order, and there is rain in winter, snow in summer, thunder and lightning in the winter season, and ice, frost, and hail in the 6th month, when red, black, or green rain falls, when mountains of dirt and stones come raining down, or when it rains dust, sand, or gravel, when the rivers and streams run backward, when mountains are afloat and boulders are washed away, when freakish happenings of this kind occur, this is the fourth calamity. When huge winds blow the people to their death, and the lands, the mountains and rivers, and the trees and forests are all at one time wiped out, when great winds come out of season, or when black winds, red winds, green winds, heavenly winds, earthly winds, fire winds, and water winds blow. When prodigies of this kind occur, this is the fifth calamity. When heaven and earth and the whole country are stricken by terrible heat so that the air seems to be on fire. When the 100 plants wither and the 5 grains fail to ripen. When the earth is red and scorched and the inhabitants all perish. When prodigies of this kind occur, this is the sixth calamity. When enemies rise up on all 4 sides and invade the nation. When rebels appear both within the ruler's family and without. When there are 5 bandits, water bandits, wind bandits, and demon bandits, and the population is subjected to devastation and disorder, and fighting and plundering break out everywhere. When prodigies of this type occur, this is the 7th calamity." End quote. The Daijoku Sutra says, quote, "Though the ruler of a state may have for countless existences in the past practiced the giving of alms, observed the precepts, and abided by the principles of wisdom, if he sees that my law, the Dharma of the Buddha, is in danger of perishing, and stands idly by without doing anything to protect it, then all the inestimable store of good causes that he has accumulated through the practices just mentioned will be entirely wiped out, and his country will become the scene of 3 inauspicious occurrences. The first is high grain prices, the second is warfare, and the third is pestilence. All the benevolent deities will abandon the country, and although the king may issue commands, the people will not obey them. The country will constantly be invaded and vexed by neighboring nations. Violent fires will rage out of control, evil winds and rains will abound, the waters will swell and overflow, and the inhabitants will be blown about by winds or swept away by floods. The paternal and maternal relatives of the ruler will join in plotting revolt. Before long, the ruler will fall gravely ill, and after his life has come to an end, he will be reborn in one of the major hells. And the same fate will befall the ruler's consort, his heir, the high ministers of the state, the lords of the cities, the village heads and generals, the magistrates of districts, and the government officials." End quote. The passages I have quoted from these 4 sutras are perfectly clear. What person in 10,000 could possibly doubt their meaning? And yet the blind and the deluded trust to heretical doctrines and fail to recognize the correct teachings. Therefore, throughout the empire these days, people are inclined to turn away from the Buddhas and the sutras and no longer endeavor to protect them. In turn, the benevolent deities and sages abandon the nation and leave their accustomed places. As a result, demons and followers of heretical doctrines create disaster and inflict calamity upon the populace. The guest thereupon flushed with anger and said, "Emperor Ming of the later Han Dynasty, having comprehended the significance of his dream of a golden man, welcomed the teachings of Buddhism brought to China by missionaries leading white horses. Prince Shotoku, having punished Mononobe no Moriya for his opposition to Buddhism, proceeded to construct temples and pagodas in Japan. Since that time, from the supreme ruler down to the numberless masses, people have worshipped the Buddhist statues and devoted their attention to the scriptures. As a result, in the monasteries of Mount Hiei and of the southern capital at Nara, at the great temples of Anjoji and Toji, throughout the land within the 4 seas, in the 5 areas adjacent to the capital and the 7 outlying regions, Buddhist scriptures have been ranged like stars in the sky, and halls of worship have spread over the land like clouds. Those who belong to the lineage of Shariputra meditate on the moon atop Eagle Peak, while those who adhere to the traditions of Hakuin-Ayasha transmit the teachings of Mount Kukutapada. How then can anyone say that the doctrines of Shakyamuni are despised or that the 3 treasures of Buddhism are neglected? If there is evidence to support such a contention, I would like to hear all the facts. The host, anxious to clarify his words, replied, "To be sure, Buddha halls stand rooftop to rooftop and sutra storehouses are ranged eave to eave. Priests are as numerous as bamboo plants and rushes, monks as common as rice and hemp seedlings. The temples and priests have been honored from centuries past, and every day respect is paid to them anew. But the monks and priests today are fawning and devious, and they confuse the people and lead them astray. The ruler and his ministers lack understanding and fail to distinguish between truth and heresy. The Nino Sutra, for example, says, quote, evil monks, hoping to gain fame and profit, in many cases appear before the ruler, the heir apparent, and the other princes, and take it upon themselves to preach doctrines that lead to the violation of the Buddhist law and the destruction of the nation. The rulers, failing to perceive the truth of the situation, listen to and put faith in such doctrines, and proceed to create regulations that are perverse in nature and do not accord with the rules of Buddhist discipline. In this way, they bring about the destruction of Buddhism and of the nation." End quote. The Nirvana Sutra states, quote, "Bodhisattvas, have no fear in your hearts because of such things as wild elephants, but evil friends, they are what you should fear. If you are killed by a wild elephant, you will not fall into any of the 3 evil paths. But if evil friends lead you to your death, you are certain to fall into one of them." End quote. The Lotus Sutra says, quote, "There will be monks in that evil age with perverse views and hearts that are fawning and crooked, who will say that they have attained what they have not attained, being proud and boastful in heart. Or there will be forest-dwelling monks wearing clothing of patched rags and living in retirement, who will claim that they are practicing the true way, despising and looking down on the rest of mankind. Greedy for profit and nourishment, they will preach the Dharma to white-robed laymen and will be respected and revered by the world as though they were arhats who possess the 6 supernatural powers. Constantly they will go about among the populace, seeking in this way to slander us. They will address the rulers, high ministers, Brahmins, and great patrons of Buddhism as well as the other monks, slandering and speaking evil of us, saying, 'These are men of perverted views who preach the doctrines of heretical sects.' In a muddied kalpa, in an evil age, there will be many different things to fear. Demons will take possession of others, and through them curse, revile, and heap shame upon us. The evil monks of that muddied age, failing to understand the Buddhist expedient means, how he preaches the Dharma in accord with what is appropriate, will confront us with foul language and angry frowns. Again and again we will be banished." End quote. In the Nirvana Sutra, the Buddha says, quote, "After I have passed away and countless hundreds of years have gone by, all the sages of the 4 stages will also have passed away. After the former day of the law has ended and the middle day of the law has begun, there will be monks who will give the appearance of abiding by the rules of monastic discipline. But they will scarcely ever read or recite the sutras, and instead will crave all kinds of food and drink to nourish their bodies. Though they wear the robes of a monk, they will go about searching for alms like so many huntsmen, spying sharply and stalking softly. They will be like a cat on the prowl for mice, and constantly they will reiterate these words, 'I have attained the state of Arhat.' Outwardly they will seem to be wise and good, but within they will harbor greed and jealousy. And when they are asked to preach the Dharma, they will conceal it, like Brahmins who have taken a vow of silence. They are not true monks, but merely have the appearance of monks. Consumed by their erroneous views, they slander the true law." End quote. When we look at the world in the light of these passages of scripture, we see that the situation is just as they describe it. If we do not admonish the evil monks, how can we hope to do good? The guest, growing more indignant than ever, said, "A wise monarch, by acting in accord with heaven and earth, perfects his rule. A sage, by distinguishing between right and wrong, brings order to the world. Monks and priests of the world today enjoy the confidence of the entire empire. If they were in fact evil monks, then the wise ruler would put no trust in them. If they were not true sages, then men of worth and understanding would not look up to them. But now, since worthies and sages do in fact honor and respect them, they must be nothing less than paragons of their kind. Why then do you pour out these wild accusations and dare to slander them? To whom are you referring to when you speak of evil monks? I would like an explanation." The host said, "In the reign of Emperor Gotoba, there was a priest named Honen who wrote a work entitled the Senchaku Shu. He contradicted the sacred teachings of Shakyamuni and brought confusion to the people in every direction. The Senchaku Shu states, quote, 'The Chinese priest Tao Chou distinguished between the Shodo, or sacred way teachings, and the Jodo, or Pure Land teachings, and urged men to abandon the former and immediately embrace the latter. First of all, there are two kinds of sacred way teachings, the Mahayana and the Hinayana. Judging from this, we may assume that the esoteric Mahayana doctrines of Shingon and the true Mahayana teachings of the Lotus Sutra are both included in the sacred way. If that is so, then the present-day sects of Shingon, Zen, Tendai, Kegon, Sanron, Hoso, Jinron, and Shuron, all these 8 schools are included in the sacred way that is to be abandoned. The priest Tanluan, in his Ojo-ron Chu, states, I note that Nagarjuna's Juju Bibasharon says, there are 2 ways by which the Bodhisattva may reach the state in which there is no retrogression. One is the difficult to practice way, the other is the easy to practice way. The difficult to practice way is the same as the sacred way, and the easy to practice way is the Pure Land way. Students of the Pure Land sect should first of all understand this point. Though they may previously have studied teachings belonging to the sacred way, if they wish to become followers of the Pure Land school, they must discard the sacred way and give their allegiance to the Pure Land teachings. End quote. Honen also says, quote, the Chinese priest Shan Tao distinguished between correct and incorrect practices and urged men to embrace the former and abandon the latter. Concerning the first of the incorrect practices, that of reading and reciting sutras, he states that, with the exception of the recitation of the Kamaryoju Sutra and the other Pure Land Sutras, the embracing and recitation of all sutras, whether Mahayana or Hinayana, exoteric or esoteric, is to be regarded as an incorrect practice. Concerning the third of the incorrect practices, that of worshipping, he states that, with the exception of worshipping the Buddha Amida, the worshipping or honor of any of the other Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, or deities of the heavenly and human worlds is to be regarded as an incorrect practice. In the light of this passage, it is clear that one should abandon the incorrect practices and concentrate upon the practice of the Pure Land teaching. What reason would we have to abandon the correct practices of the Pure Land teaching, which ensure that, out of 100 persons, all 100 will be reborn in the Western paradise, and cling instead to the various incorrect practices and procedures, which could not save even 1 person in 1,000? Followers of the way should ponder this carefully. End quote. Honen further states, quote, in the Jogen Ryuzo Roku, we find it recorded that from the 600 volumes of the Daihanya Sutra to the Hojoju Sutra, the exoteric and esoteric sutras of Mahayana Buddhism total 637 works and 2,883 volumes. All of these should now be replaced by the recitation of the single Mahayana phrase, the Nembutsu. You should understand that when the Buddha was preaching according to the capacity of his various listeners, he for a time taught the 2 methods of concentrated meditation and unconcentrated meditation. But later, when he revealed his own enlightenment, he ceased to teach these 2 methods. The only teaching that, once revealed, shall never cease to be taught is the single doctrine of the Nembutsu. End quote. Again, Honen states, quote, the passage which says that the practitioner of the Nembutsu must possess 3 kinds of mind is found in the Kamaryoju Sutra. In the commentary on that sutra, we read, someone asked if there are those who differ in understanding and practice from the followers of the Nembutsu, persons of heretical and mistaken belief. How can one make certain that their perverse and differing views will not cause trouble? We also see that these persons of evil views, with their different understanding and different practices, are compared to a band of robbers who call back the travelers who have already gone 1 or 2 steps along their journey. In my opinion, when these passages speak of different understanding, different practices, varying doctrines, and varying beliefs, they were referring to the teachings of the sacred way. End quote. Finally, in a concluding passage, Honen says, quote, if one wishes to escape quickly from the sufferings of life and death, one should confront these 2 superior teachings and then proceed to put aside the teachings of the sacred way and choose those of the Pure Land. And if one wishes to follow the teachings of the Pure Land, one should confront the correct and incorrect practices and then proceed to abandon all those that are incorrect and devote one's entire attention to those that are correct. End quote. When we examine these passages, we see that Honen quotes the erroneous explanations of Tanluan, Tao Cho, and Shan Tao to establish the categories he calls sacred way and Pure Land, difficult to practice way and easy to practice way. He then takes all of the 637 works and 2,883 volumes that comprise the Mahayana Sutras of the Buddha's lifetime, including those of the Lotus Sutra and Shingon, along with all the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and deities of the heavenly and human worlds, and assigns them all to the sacred way, the difficult to practice way, and the incorrect practices categories, and urges men to discard, close, ignore, and abandon them. With these 4 injunctions, he leads all people astray. And on top of that, he groups together all the sage monks of the 3 countries of India, China, and Japan, as well as the students of Buddhism of the 10 directions, and calls them a band of robbers, causing the people to insult them. In doing so, he turns his back on the passages in the 3 Pure Land Sutras, the sutras of his own sect, which contain Amida's vow to save everyone, except those who commit the 5 cardinal sins or slander the true law. At the same time, he shows that he fails to understand the warning contained in the 2nd volume of the Lotus Sutra, the most important sutra expounded in the 5 preaching periods of the Buddha's life, which reads, quote, one who refuses to take faith in this sutra and instead slanders it, after he dies, he will fall into the hell of incessant suffering, end quote. And now we have come to this later age when men are no longer sages. Each enters his own dark road, and all alike forget the direct way. How pitiful that no one cures them of their blindness. How pitiful to see them vainly lending encouragement to these false beliefs. And as a result, everyone from the ruler of the nation down to the humblest peasant believes that there are no true sutras outside of the 3 Pure Land Sutras, and no Buddhas other than the Buddha Amida with his 2 attendants. Once there were men like Dengyo, Gishin, Jikaku, and Chisho who journeyed 10,000 leagues across the ways to acquire the sacred teachings, or visited all the mountains and rivers of Japan to acquire Buddhist statues which they held in reverence. In some cases, they built holy temples on the peaks of high mountains in which to preserve those scriptures and statues. In other cases, they constructed sacred halls in the bottom of deep valleys where such objects could be worshipped and honored. As a result, the Buddhas Shakyamuni and Yakushi, shown side by side, casting their influence upon present and future ages, while the Bodhisattvas Kokuzo and Jizo brought benefit to the living and the dead. The rulers of the nation contributed counties or villages so that the lamps might continue to burn bright before the images, while the stewards of the great estates offered their fields and gardens to provide for the upkeep of the temples. But because of this book by Honen, this Senchakushu, the Lord Buddha Shakyamuni is forgotten, and all honor is paid to Amida, the Buddha of the Western land. The Lord Buddha's transmission of the law is ignored, and Yakushi, the Buddha of the Eastern region, is neglected. All attention is paid to the 3 works and 4 volumes of the Pure Land Scriptures, and all the other wonderful teachings that Shakyamuni proclaimed throughout the 5 periods of his preaching life are cast aside. If temples are not dedicated to Amida, then people no longer have any desire to support them or pay honor to the Buddhas enshrined there. If monks do not chant the Nembutsu, then people quickly forget all about giving those monks alms. As a result, the halls of the Buddha fall into ruin. Scarcely a wisp of smoke arises from their mossy tiles, and the monks' quarters stand empty and dilapidated, the dew deep on the grasses in their courtyards. And in spite of such conditions, no one gives thought to protecting the law or to restoring the temples. Hence the sage monks who once presided over the temples leave and do not return, and the benevolent deities who guarded the Buddhist teachings depart and no longer appear. This has all come about because of this Senchakushu of Honen. How pitiful to think that in the space of a few decades, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people have been deluded by these devilish teachings, and in so many cases confused as to the true teachings of Buddhism. If people favor perverse doctrines and forget what is correct, can the benevolent deities be anything but angry? If people cast aside doctrines that are all-encompassing and take up those that are incomplete, can the worlds escape the plot of demons? Rather than offering up 10,000 prayers for a remedy, it would be better simply to outlaw this one evil doctrine that is the source of all the trouble. This time the guest was truly enraged and said, "In the ages since our original teacher, the Buddha Shakyamuni, preached the 3 Pure Land Sutras, the priest Tanluan had originally studied the 4 treatises, but abandoned them and put all his faith in the Pure Land teachings. Similarly, the priest Tao Cho ceased to spread the multifarious doctrines of the Nirvana Sutra and devoted all his attention to the practices of the Western region. The priest Shantao discarded the incorrect practices and concentrated on the single practice of the Pure Land, and the priest Eshin collected passages from various sutras to form his work, stressing the importance of a single practice, the Nembutsu. Such was the manner in which these men honored and respected the Buddha Amida, and uncountable numbers of people as a result were able to gain rebirth in the Pure Land. Of particular note was the venerable Honen, who as a child entered the monastery on Mount Hiei. By the time he was 17, he had worked his way through all 60 volumes of Tendai literature and had investigated all 8 sects and mastered their essentials. In addition, he had read through the entire body of sutras and treatises 7 times and exhausted all the works of exegesis and biography. His wisdom shone like the sun and moon, and his virtue exceeded that of the earlier teachers. In spite of all this, he was in doubt as to the proper path to salvation and could not make out the true meaning of nirvana. Therefore, he read and examined all the texts he could, pondering deeply and considered every possibility, and in the end put aside all the sutras and concentrated on the single practice of the Nembutsu. In addition, he received confirmation of his decision when Shantao miraculously appeared to him in a dream, and he proceeded to spread his doctrines among friends and strangers in all 4 corners of the land. Thereafter, he was hailed as a reincarnation of the Bodhisattva Seishi, or was revered as Shantao reborn. And every quarter, people of eminent and lowly birth alike bowed their heads in respect, and men and women from all over Japan sought him. Since that time, the springs and autumns have succeeded each other, and the years have accumulated. And yet you insist upon putting aside the venerable teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha contained in the Pure Land Sutras, and willingly speak evil of the writings concerning the Buddha Amida? Why do you try to blame the sacred age of Honen for the disasters of recent years, going out of your way to slander the former teachers of Pure Land doctrine, and to heap abuse on a sage like Honen? You are, as the saying goes, deliberately blowing back the fur and hunting for flaws in the leather, deliberately piercing the skin in hopes of drawing blood. From ancient times to the present, the world has never seen such a speaker of evil. You had better learn a little caution and restraint. When you pile up such grave offenses, how can you hope to escape punishment? I am afraid even to sit here in your company. I must take up my staff and be on my way." The host, smiling, restrained his guest and said, "Insects that live on smartweed forget how bitter it tastes. Those who stay long in privies forget how foul the smell is. Here you listen to my good words and think them wicked, point to a slanderer like Honen and call him a sage, mistrust a true teacher and take him for an evil monk? Your confusion is great indeed, and your offense anything but light. Listen to my explanation on how this confusion arose, and let us discuss the matter in detail. The doctrines that Shakyamuni Buddha preached in the course of his lifetime can be assigned to 5 distinct preaching periods. The order in which they were preached can be established, and they can be divided into provisional and true teachings. But Tan Luan, Tao Chou, and Shan Tao embraced the provisional teachings and forgot about the true ones, went by what had been taught in the earlier period of the Buddha's life and discarded what was taught later. They were not the kind of men who delve into the deep places of Buddhist doctrine. Honen in particular, though he followed the practices advocated by these earlier men, was ignorant as to the source from whence they came. How do we know this? Because he lumped together all the 637 Mahayana scriptures with the 2,883 volumes of text, and along with them all the various Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and the deities of the heavenly and human worlds, and urged people to discard, close, ignore, and abandon them, with these 4 injunctions corrupting the hearts of all people. Thus he poured out perverted words of his own invention and took absolutely no cognizance of the explanations put forth in the Buddhist scriptures. His is the worst kind of baseless talk, a clear case of defamation. There are no words to describe it, no way to censure it that is not too mild. And yet men all put faith in this baseless talk of his, and without exception pay honor to his Senchakushu. As a consequence, they revere the 3 sutras of the Pure Land and cast all the other sutras aside. They look up to one Buddha alone, Amida of the Land of Bliss, and forget about the other Buddhas. A man such as Honen is in truth the arch-enemy of the Buddhas and the scriptures, and the foe of sage monks and ordinary men and women alike. And now his heretical teachings have spread throughout the 8 regions of the country. They have penetrated every one of the 10 directions. You became quite horrified when I blamed an earlier period for the disasters that have occurred in recent years. Perhaps I should cite a few examples from the past to show you that you are mistaken in your feelings. The 2nd volume of the Makashakan quotes a passage from the Shi-Chi, or Records of the Historian, which says, quote, "In the closing years of the Chou dynasty, there were persons who let their hair hang down and went about naked to the waist. They did not observe the rites and regulations," end quote. The Guketsu commentary on the Makashakan in the 2nd volume explains this passage by quoting from the Tso Chuan as follows, quote, "When King Ping of the Chou first moved his capital east to Luoyang, he saw men by the Yi River who let their hair hang down and performed sacrifices in the fields. Someone who had great understanding said, 'In less than 100 years the dynasty will fall. The rites are already neglected.'" End quote. From this it is evident that the portent appears first, and later the disaster itself comes about. The Makashikan passage goes on to say, quote, "Zhuan Qi of the Western Qin dynasty was a man of extraordinary talent, but he let his hair grow like a mass of brambles and left his belt undone. Later, the sons of the aristocracy all imitated him until those who behaved in a churlish and insulting manner were thought to be acting quite naturally, and those who were restrained and proper in their behavior were ridiculed as mere peasants. This was a sign that the Su Ma family, the rulers of the Qin dynasty, would meet their downfall." End quote. Similarly, the Nito Junrei Ki, or Record of a Pilgrimage to China in Search of the Law by Jikaku Daishi, records that in the 1st year of the Hui Chang era, that's 841, Emperor Wu Zung of the Tang Dynasty commanded the priest Qing Shuang of Changqing Temple to transmit the Nimbutsu teachings of the Buddha Amida in the various temples. Qing Shuang spent 3 days in each temple, going about from one temple to another without ever ceasing. In the 2nd year of the same era, soldiers from the land of the Uyghurs invaded the borders of the Tang Empire. In the 3rd year of the same era, the regional commander in the area north of the Yellow River suddenly raised a revolt. Later, the Kingdom of Tibet once more refused to obey orders from China, and the Uyghurs repeatedly seized Chinese territory. On the whole, the conflicts and uprisings were like those that prevailed at the time when the Qin dynasty and the military leader Xiang Yu were overthrown, and the towns and villages were devastated by fire and other disasters. What was even worse, Emperor Wu Zung carried out a vast campaign to wipe out Buddhist teachings and destroyed a great many temples and monasteries. He was never able to put down the uprisings and died in agony shortly after. This is the essence of Jikaku's original passage. In view of these events, we should consider the fact that Honen was active during the reign of Emperor Gotoba, around the Kenin era, that's 1201 to 1203, And, as everyone knows, in 1221 the retired Emperor Go-Toba was thwarted in his attempt to assert the authority of the throne, and he and 2 other retired emperors were forced into exile. Thus China provided an earlier example of how the Pure Land teachings brought about the fall of an emperor, and our own country offers similar proof. You should not be in doubt about the matter or consider it strange. The only thing to do now is to abandon evil ways and take up those that are good, to cut off this affliction at the source, to cut it off at the root. The guest, looking somewhat mollified, said, "Though I have not yet probed deeply into the matter, I believe I understand to some degree what you are saying. Nevertheless, both in Kyoto, the capital, and in Kamakura, the headquarters of the shogun, there are numerous eminent Buddhist leaders and key figures in the clergy. And yet none of them have so far appealed to the shogun considering this affair or submitted a memorial to the throne. You, on the other hand, a person of humble position, think nothing of spewing out offensive accusations. Your assertions are open to question and your reasoning lacks authority." The host said, "Though I may be a person of little ability, I have reverently given myself to the study of the Mahayana. A blue fly, if it clings to the tail of a thoroughbred horse, can travel 10,000 miles, and the green ivy that twines around the tall pine can grow to 1,000 feet. I was born as the son of the one Buddha, Shakyamuni, and I serve the king of scriptures, the Lotus Sutra. How could I observe the decline of the Buddhist law and not be filled with emotions of pity and distress? Moreover, the Nirvana Sutra states, quote, if even a good priest sees someone slandering the law and disregards him, failing to reproach him, to oust him or to punish him for his offense, then that priest is betraying Buddhism. But if he takes the slanderer severely to task, drives him off or punishes him, then he is my disciple and one who truly understands my teachings." End quote. Although I may not be a good priest, I certainly do not want to be accused of betraying Buddhism. Therefore, in order to avoid such charges, I have cited a few general principles and given a rough explanation of the matter. Long ago, in the Genin era, in 1224, petitions to the throne were submitted time and again by the 2 temples of Enryakuji on Mount Hiei and Kofukuji in Nara. And as a result, an imperial command and a letter of instruction from the shogunate were handed down, ordering that the wood blocks used to print Honin's Senchakushu be confiscated and brought to the great lecture hall of Enryakuji Temple. There they were burned in order to repay the debt owed to the Buddhas of the past, present, and future. In addition, orders were given that the menials who are attached to the Gion shrine should dig up and destroy Honin's grave in Kyoto. Then, Honin's disciples Ryukan, Shoko, Jokaku, Sasho, and the others were condemned by the government to exile in distant regions and were never pardoned. In view of these facts, how can you say that no one has submitted a complaint to the authorities concerning these matters? The guest, continuing to speak in a mild manner, replied, "One could hardly say that Honin is the only one who disparages sutras and speaks ill of other priests, since you do the same thing yourself. However, it is true that he takes the 637 Mahayana scriptures and their 2,883 volumes of text, along with all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and the deities of the heavenly and human worlds, and urges people to discard, close, ignore, and abandon them. There is no doubt that the 4 injunctions are his very words. The meaning of the passage is quite clear. But you keep harping on this one little flaw in the jewel and severely slandering him for it. I do not know whether he spoke out of delusion or out of true enlightenment. Between you and Honin, I cannot tell which is wise and which is foolish, or determine whose assertions are right and whose are wrong. However, you assert that all the recent disasters are to be traced to the Senchakushu of Honin, speaking quite volubly on that point and elaborating on the meaning of your assertion. Now surely the peace of the world and the stability of the nation are sought by both the ruler and subject and desired by all the inhabitants of the country. The nation achieves prosperity through the Buddhist law, and the validity of the law is proven by the people who embrace it. If the nation is destroyed and the people are wiped out, then who will continue to pay reference to the Buddhas? Who will continue to have faith in the law? Therefore, one must first of all pray for the safety of the nation and then work to establish the Buddhist law. Now, if you know of any means whereby disasters can be prevented and troubles brought to an end, I would like to hear about it." The host said, "There is no doubt that I am the foolish one. I would never dare claim to be wise. However, I would just like to quote a few passages from the scriptures. Concerning the means for issuing order in the nation, there are numerous passages in both Buddhist and non-Buddhist texts, and it would be difficult to cite them all here. Since taking up the study of Buddhism, however, I have frequently given thought to this matter, and it seems to me that prohibiting those who slander the law and paying respect to monks who follow the correct way is the best way to assure stability within the nation and peace in the world at large." In the Nirvana Sutra, we read, quote, "The Buddha said, with the exception of one type of person, you may offer alms to all kinds of persons and everyone will praise you." Chunda said, "What do you mean when you speak of one type of person?" The Buddha replied, "I mean the type described in this sutra as violators of the commandments." Chunda spoke again, saying, "I'm afraid I still do not understand. May I ask you to explain further? The Buddha addressed Chunda, saying, "By violators of the commandments, I mean the Ikchantika. In the case of all other types of persons, you may offer alms. Everyone will praise you, and you will achieve great rewards." Chunda spoke once more, asking, "What is the meaning of the term Ikchantika?" The Buddha said, "Chunda, suppose there should be priests or nuns, laymen or women, who speak careless and evil words and slander the true law, and that they should go on committing these grave acts without ever showing any inclination to reform or any sign of repentance in their hearts. Persons of this kind, I would say, are following the path of the Ikchantika. Again, there may be those who commit the 4 grave offenses, or are guilty of the 5 cardinal sins, and who, though aware that they are guilty of serious faults, from the beginning have no trace of fear or contrition in their hearts, or if they do, give no outward sign of it. When it comes to the true law, they show no inclination to establish it and help to protect it over the ages, but rather speak of it with malice and contempt. Their words replete with error. Persons of this kind, too, I would say, are following the path of the Ikchantika. With the exception of this one group of people called Ikchantika, however, you may offer alms to all others and everyone will praise you." End quote. Elsewhere in the same sutra, the Buddha spoke in these words, quote, "When I recall the past, I remember that I was the king of a great state in the continent of Jambudvipa. My name was Senyo, and I loved and venerated the Mahayana scriptures. My heart was pure and good and had no trace of evil, jealousy, or stinginess. Men of devout faith, at that time I cherished the Mahayana teachings in my heart. Once when I heard the Brahmans slandering these teachings, I had them put to death on the spot. Men of devout faith. As a result of that action, I never thereafter fell into hell." End quote. In another passage it says, quote, "In the past, when the Tathagata was the ruler of a nation and practiced the way of the Bodhisattva, he put to death a number of Brahmins." End quote. Again it says, quote, "There are 3 degrees of killing, the lower, middle, and upper degrees. The lower degree constitutes the killing of any humble creature, from an ant to any of the various kinds of animals. Only the killing of a Bodhisattva who has deliberately chosen to be born in animal form is excluded. As a result of a killing of the lower degree, one will fall into the realm of hell, hunger, or animality, and will suffer all the pains appropriate to a killing of the lower degree. Why should this be? Because even the animals and other humble creatures possess the roots of goodness, insignificant though those roots may be. That is why a person who kills such a creature must suffer full retribution for his offense. Killing any person from an ordinary mortal to an anagamin constitutes what is termed the middle degree. As a consequence of such an act of killing, one may fall into the realm of hell, hunger, or animality, and will suffer all the pains appropriate to a killing of the middle degree. The upper degree of killing refers to the killing of a parent, an arhat, a person who has reached the state of pratyeka Buddha, or realization, or a bodhisattva who has completed his efforts and will never retrogress. For such a crime, one will fall into the hell of incessant suffering. Men of devout faith, if someone were to kill an Ikchantika, that killing would not fall into any of the 3 categories just mentioned. Men of devout faith, the various Brahmins that I have said were put to death, all of them were in fact Ikchantika." End quote. In the Nino Sutra, we read, quote, "The Buddha announced to the king Prasenajit, 'Thus I entrust the protection of my teachings to the ruler of the nation rather than to the monks and nuns. Why do I do so? Because the monks and nuns do not possess the kind of power and authority that the king has." End quote. The Nirvana Sutra states, quote, "Now I entrust the true law which is unexcelled to the rulers, the ministers, the high officials, and the 4 kinds of believers. If anyone should vilify the true law, then the high officials and 4 kinds of believers should reprimand him and bring him to order." End quote. It also states, quote, "The Buddha said, 'Kasho, it is because I was a defender of the true law that I have now been able to attain this diamond-like body.' Men of devout faith, defenders of the true law need not observe the 5 precepts or practice the rules of proper behavior. Rather, they should carry knives and swords, bows and arrows, prongs and lances." End quote. Again, the Buddha said, quote, "Even though there may be those who observe the 5 precepts, they do not deserve to be called practitioners of the Mahayana. But even if one does not observe the 5 precepts, if he defends the true law, then he may be called a practitioner of the Mahayana. Defenders of the true law ought to arm themselves with knives and swords, weapons and staves. Even though they carry swords and staves, I would call them men who observe the precepts." End quote. The Buddha likewise said, quote, "Men of devout faith, in past ages, in this very city of Kushinagara, a Buddha appeared whose name was Kangi Zoyaku Nyorai, or the Buddha Joy Increasing. After this Buddha passed away, the true law that he had taught remained in the world for countless millions of years. Finally, only 40 more years were left before the law was due to come to an end. At that time there was a monk named Kakutoku, who observed the precepts. There were many monks at this time who violated the precepts, and when they heard this monk preaching, they all conceived evil designs in their hearts. and arming themselves with swords and staves, attacked this teacher of the law. At this time, the ruler of the kingdom was named Utoku. He received reports of what was happening, and, in order to defend the law, he went at once to the place where the monk was preaching the law and fought with all his might against the evil monks who did not observe the precepts. As a result, the monk who had been preaching the law was able to escape grievous injury, but the king received so many wounds from the knives and swords, prongs and lances, that there was not a spot on his body the size of a mustard seed that remained unharmed. At this time the monk Kakutoku praised the king, saying, "Splendid, splendid! You, O king, are now a true defender of the true law. In ages to come this body of yours will surely become a boundless vessel of the law." At that time the king had already heard the teachings of the law, and he felt great joy in his heart. Thereupon his life came to an end, and he was reborn in the land of the Buddha Ashoku, where he became the principal disciple of the Buddha. Moreover, all the military leaders, citizens, and associates of the king who had fought beside him or had rejoiced in his effort were filled with an unflagging determination to achieve enlightenment, and when they died, all of them were reborn in the land of the Buddha Ashoku. Later, the monk Kakutoku also died, and he too was reborn in the land of the Buddha Ashoku, where he became second among the disciples who received the direct teachings of the Buddha. Thus, if the true law is about to come to an end, this is the way one ought to support and defend it. Kasho. The king who lived at that time was I myself, and the monk who preached the law was the Buddha Kasho. Kasho. Those who defend the true law enjoy this kind of boundless reward. As a consequence, I have been able to obtain the distinguishing characteristics that I possess today, to adorn myself with them, and to put on the Dharma body that can never be destroyed. Then the Buddha declared to the Bodhisattva Kasho, "For this reason, lay believers who wish to defend the law should arm themselves with swords and staves and protect it in this manner. Men of devout faith, in the age of confusion and evil, after I have passed away, the nation will fall into neglect and disorder, men will plunder and steal from one another, and the common people will be reduced to starvation. Because of hunger, many men at the time will declare their determination to leave their families and become monks. Men such as these may be called shavpates. When this crowd of shavpates sees anyone who is attempting to protect the true law, they will chase after him and drive him away, or perhaps even kill him or do him injury. That is why I now give permission for monks who observe the precepts to associate with and keep company with laymen who bear swords and staves. For even though they carry swords and staves, I would call them men who observe the precepts. But although they may carry swords and staves, they should never use them to take life." End quote. The Lotus Sutra says, quote, "One who refuses to take faith in this sutra and instead slanders it immediately destroys the seeds for becoming a Buddha in this world. After he dies, he will fall into the hell of incessant suffering." End quote. The meaning of these passages from the sutras is perfectly clear. What need is there for me to add any further explanation? If we accept the words of the Lotus Sutra, then we must understand that slandering the Mahayana scriptures is more serious than committing the 5 cardinal sins. Therefore, one who does so will be confined in the great fortress of the hell of incessant suffering and cannot hope for release for countless eons. According to the Nirvana Sutra, even though you may give alms to a person who has committed one of the 5 cardinal sins, you must never give alms to a person who has slandered the law. He who kills so much as an ant will fall into one of the 3 evil paths, but he who helps to eradicate slanderers of the law will ascend to the state from which there can be no retrogression. Thus, the passage tells us that the monk Kakutoku was reborn as the Buddha Kasho, and that King Utoku was reborn as the Buddha Shakyamuni. The Lotus and the Nirvana Sutras represent the very heart of the doctrines that Shakyamuni preached during the 5 periods of his teaching life. Their warnings must be viewed with the utmost gravity. Who would fail to heed them? And yet those people who forget about the correct way and slander the law put more trust than ever in Honin's Senchakushu and grow blinder than ever in their stupidity. Thus some of them, remembering how their master looked in life, fashioned sculptures and paintings of him, while others, putting faith in his perverse teachings, carved wood blocks with which to print his offensive words. These images and writings they scatter about throughout the area within the seas, carrying them beyond the cities and into the countryside until wherever honor is paid, it is to the practices of this school, and wherever alms are given, it is to the priests of this sect. As a result, we see people cutting off the fingers of the images of Shakyamuni and refashioning them to form the gesture appropriate to Amida, or renovating temples formerly dedicated to Yakushi, the Buddha of the eastern region, and fitting them with statues of Amida, the lord of the western land. Or we find the ceremony of copying the Lotus Sutra, which has been carried out for over 400 years on Mount Hiei, being suspended, and the copying of the 3 Pure Land Sutras substituted in its place. Or the annual lectures on the doctrines of the great teacher Tiantai being replaced by lectures on the teachings of Shantao. Indeed, the slanderous people and their associates are too numerous to count. Are they not destroyers of the Buddha? Are they not destroyers of the law? Are they not destroyers of the priesthood? And all their heretical teachings derive from the Senchakushu. Alas, how pitiful that the others should turn their backs on the enlightened prohibitions of the Buddha. How tragic that they should heed the gross and deluded words of this ignorant monk. If we hope to bring order and tranquility to the world without further delay, we must put an end to these slanders of the law that fill the country. The guest said, "If we are to put an end to these people who slander the law and do away with those who violate the prohibitions of the Buddha, then are we to condemn them to death as described in the passages from the sutra you have just cited? If we do that, then we ourselves will be guilty of inflicting injury and death upon others, and will suffer the consequences, will we not?" In the Daijoku Sutra, the Buddha says, quote, "If a person shaves his head and puts on clerical robes, then, whether that person observes the precepts or violates them, both gods and men should give him alms. In doing so, they are giving alms in support to me, for that person is my son. But if men beat and abuse that person, they are beating my son, and if they curse and insult him, they are reviling me." End quote. If we stop to consider, we must realize that regardless of whether one is good or bad, right or wrong, if he is a priest or monk, then he deserves to have alms and nourishment extended to him. For how could one beat and insult the son and still not cause grief and sorrow to the father? The Brahmins who beat the Buddha's disciple Madhyayana to death with their staves have for a long time been sunk in the hell of incessant suffering. Because Devadatta murdered the nun Updalavarna, he has gone on and on choking in the flames of the Avijji hell. Examples from earlier ages make the matter perfectly clear, and later ages fear this offense most of all. You speak of punishing those who slander the law, but to do so would violate the Buddha's prohibitions. I can hardly believe that such a course would be right. How can you justify it? The host said, "You have clearly seen the passages from the sutras that I have cited, and yet you can ask a question like that? Are they beyond the power of your mind to comprehend? Or do you fail to understand the reasoning behind them? I certainly have no intention of censuring the sons of the Buddha. My only hatred is for the act of slandering the law. According to the teachings of the Buddhists who lived prior to Shakyamuni, slanderous priests would have incurred the death penalty. But in the sutras preached since the time of Shakyamuni, priests of this type have merely been prevented from receiving alms. Now, if all the 4 kinds of believers within the 4 seeds and 10,000 lands would only cease giving alms to wicked priests and instead all come over to the side of the good, then how could any more troubles rise to plague us or disasters come to confront us?" With this, the guest moved off his mat in a gesture of respect, straightened the collar of his robe, and said, "The Buddhist teachings vary greatly, and it is difficult to investigate each doctrine in full. I have had many doubts and perplexities and have been unable to distinguish right from wrong. Nevertheless, this work by the Venerable Honen, the Senchakushu, does in fact exist, and it lumps together all the various Buddhas, sutras, bodhisattvas, and deities, and says that one should discard, close, ignore, and abandon them. The meaning of the text is perfectly clear, and as a result of this, the sages have departed from the nation, the benevolent deities have left their dwelling places, hunger and thirst fill the world, and disease and pestilence spread abroad. Now, by citing passages from the wide variety of scriptures, you have clearly demonstrated the rights and wrongs of the matter. Therefore, I have completely forsaken my earlier mistaken convictions, and my ears and eyes have been opened on point after point. There can be no doubt that all men, from the ruler down to the common people, rejoice in and desire the stability of the nation and the peace of the world. If we can quickly put an end to the alms that are given to these exchantikas and ensure that continuing support is instead given to the host of true priests and nuns, if we can still these white waves that trouble the ocean of the Buddha and cut down these green groves that overgrow the mountain of the law, then the world may become as peaceful as it was in the golden age of Fuzi and Xingnu, and the nation may flourish as it did under the sage rulers Yao and Shun. After that, there will be a time to dip into the waters of the law and decide which are shallow doctrines and which are deep, and to pay honor to the pillars and beams that support the house of the Buddha." The host exclaimed with delight, "As the proverb says, the dove has changed into a hawk, the sparrow into a clam. How gratifying! You have transformed yourself through your association with me, and like the bramble growing in the hemp field, you have learned to stand up straight. If you will truly give consideration to the troubles I have been describing and put entire faith in these words of mine, then the winds will blow gently, the waves will be calm, and in no time at all we will enjoy bountiful harvests. But a person's heart may change with the times, and the nature of a thing may alter with its surroundings. Just as the moon on the water will be tossed about by the waves, or the soldiers in the vanguard will be cowed by the swords of the enemy, so, although at this moment you may say you believe in my words, I fear that later you will forget them completely. Now, if we wish first of all to bring security to the nation and to pray for our present and future lives, then we must hasten to examine and consider the situation and take measures as soon as possible to remedy it." Why do I say this? Because of the 7 types of disasters described in the passage from the Yakushi Sutra that I cited earlier. 5 have already occurred. Only 2 have yet to appear: the calamity of invasion from foreign lands and the calamity of revolt within one's own domain. And of the 3 calamities mentioned in the passage from the Daijoku Sutra, 2 have already made their appearance. Only 1 remains: the disaster of warfare. The different types of disaster and calamity enumerated in the Konko Myo Sutra have arisen one after the other. Only that described as bandits and marauders from other regions invading and plundering the nation has yet to materialize. This is the only trouble that has not yet come. And of the 7 calamities listed in the Nino Sutra, 6 are now upon us in full force. Only one has not yet appeared, the calamity that occurs when enemies rise up on all 4 sides and invade the nation. Moreover, as the Nino Sutra says, quote, when a nation becomes disordered, it is the spirits which first show signs of rampancy. Because these spirits become rampant, all the people of the nation become disordered, end quote. Now, if we examine the present situation carefully in the light of this passage, we will see that the various spirits have for some time been rampant, and many of the people have perished. If the first predicted misfortune in the sutra has already occurred, as is obvious, then how can we doubt that the later disasters will follow? If, in punishment for the evil doctrines that are upheld, the troubles that have yet to appear should fall upon us one after the other, then it will be too late to act, will it not? Emperors and kings have their foundation in the state and bring peace and order to the age. Ministers and commodores hold possession of their fields and gardens and supply the needs of the world. But if bandits come from other regions to invade the nation, or if revolt breaks out within the domain and people's lands are seized and plundered, how can there be anything but terror and confusion? If the nation is destroyed and families are wiped out, then where can one flee for safety? If you care anything about your personal security, you should first of all pray for order and tranquility throughout the 4 quarters of the land, should you not? It seems to me that when people are in the world, they all fear what their lot may be in life to come. So it is that some of them put their faith in heretical teachings, or pay honor to those who slander the law. It distresses me that they should be so confused about right and wrong, and at the same time I feel pity that, having embraced Buddhism, they should have chosen the wrong kind. With the power of faith that is in their hearts, why must they vainly give credence to heretical doctrines? If they do not shake off these delusions that they cling to but continue to harbor false ideas, then they will quickly leave the world of the living and fall into the hell of incessant suffering. Thus the Daijoku Sutra says, quote, though a ruler of a state may have for countless existences in the past practiced the giving of alms, observed the precepts, and abided by the principles of wisdom, if he sees that my law, the Dharma of the Buddha, is in danger of perishing and stands idly by without doing anything to protect it, then all the inestimable store of good causes that he has accumulated through the practices just mentioned will be entirely wiped out. Before long, the ruler will fall gravely ill, and after his life has come to an end, he will be reborn in one of the major hells. And the same fate will befall the ruler's consort, his heir, the high ministers of the state, the lords of cities, the village heads and generals, the magistrates of districts, and the government officials. End quote. The Nino Sutra states, quote, if a man destroys the teachings of the Buddha, he will have no filial sons, no harmony with his close relatives, and no aid from the heavenly deities. Disease and evil spirits will come day after day to torment him. Disasters will descend on him incessantly, and misfortunes will dog him wherever he goes. And when he dies, he will fall into one of the 3 realms of hell, hunger, or animality. Even if he should be reborn as a human being, he will be destined to become a slave in the army. Retribution will follow as an echo follows a sound, or a shadow follows a form. A person riding at night may put out the lamp, but the words he has written will still remain. It is the same with the destiny we create for ourselves in the threefold world. End quote. The second volume of the Lotus Sutra says, quote, one who refuses to take faith in the sutra and instead slanders it, after he dies, he will fall into the hell of incessant suffering, end quote. And in the Fukyo chapter, in the 7th volume, it says, quote, for 1,000 eons they dwelt in the hell of incessant suffering and underwent great pain and torment, end quote. In the Nirvana Sutra, we read, quote, if a man separates himself from good friends, refuses to listen to the true law, and instead embraces evil teachings, then, as a result, he will sink down into the hell of incessant suffering, where he will experience indescribable torment, end quote. When we examine this wide variety of sutras, we find that they all stress how grave a matter it is to slander the law. How pitiful that all men should go out of the gate of the true law and enter so deep into the prison of these perverse dogmas. How stupid that they should fall one after another into the snares of these evil doctrines, and remain for so long entangled in this net of slanderous teachings. They lose their way in these mists and miasmas, and sink down amid the raging flames of hell. How they must grieve, how they must suffer. Therefore you must quickly reform the tenets that you hold in your heart and embrace the one true vehicle, the single good doctrine of the Lotus Sutra. If you do so, then the threefold world will all become the Buddha land, and how could a Buddha land ever decline? The regions in the 10 directions will all become treasure realms, and how could a treasure realm ever suffer harm? If you live in a country that knows no decline or diminution, in a land that suffers no harm or disruption, then your body will find peace and security, and your mind will be calm and untroubled. You must believe my words. Heed what I say. The guest said, since it concerns both this life and lives to come, who could fail to be cautious in a matter such as this? Who could fail to agree with you? Now when I examine the passages you have cited from the sutras and see exactly what the Buddha has said, I realize that slandering is a very grave offense indeed, that violating the law is in truth a terrible sin. I have put all my faith in one Buddha alone, Amida, and rejected all the other Buddhas. I have honored the 3 Pure Land Sutras and set aside the other sutras. But this was not due to any distorted ideas of my own conception. I was simply obeying the words of the eminent men of the past. And the same is true of all other persons in the 10 directions who follow the Pure Land teachings. But now I realize that to do so means to exhaust oneself in futile efforts in this life, and to fall into the hell of incessant suffering in the life to come. The texts that you have cited are perfectly clear on this point, and their arguments are detailed. They leave no room for doubt. With your kind instruction to guide me, I have been able bit by bit to dispel the ignorance from my mind. Now I hope we may set about quickly as possible, taking measures to deal with these slanders against the law and to bring peace to the world without delay, thus ensuring that I may live in safety in this life and enjoy good fortune in the life to come. But it is not enough that I alone should accept and have faith in your words. We must see to it that others as well are warned of their errors. End of Rissho Ankoku Ron. Rationale for submitting the Rissho Ankoku Ron. In the first year of the Shoka era, 1257, when the reverse marker of Jupiter was in the sector of the sky with the cyclical sign Hinotomi, on the 23rd day of the 8th month, at the time when the hour of the dog gives way to the hour of the boar, that's 9 p.m., there occurred an earthquake of unprecedented magnitude. In the second year of the same era, 1258, cyclical sign Tsuchi noe Uma, on the first day of the 8th month, there was a great wind. In the third year, 1259, cyclical sign Tsuchi noto Hitsuji, a major famine occurred. In the first year of the Shogun era, 1259, cyclical sign Tsuchi noto Hitsuji, disease was rampant, and throughout the 4 seasons of the second year, 1260, cyclical sign Kanoe Saru, the sickness continued to rage without abating. By this time, more than half of the ordinary citizens of the nation had been laid low by death. The rulers of the country, alarmed at this state of affairs, turned to the scriptures of Buddhism and the non-Buddhist writings for help, ordering that various prayers be offered. These, however, failed to produce the slightest effect. On the contrary, famine and disease raged more fiercely than ever. I, Nichiren, observing this state of affairs, proceeded to consult the various Buddhist scriptures. There I discovered the reason why these prayers are without effect, and on the contrary actually make the situation worse, along with passages of proof to support it. In the end, I had no other recourse than to compile a work to present my findings, entitling it Rissho Ankoku Ron, in the first year of the Bunno era, 1260, a cyclical sign Kanoe Saru, on the 16th day of the 7th month at the hour of the dragon, that's 7 to 9 a.m. I handed it to the lay monk Yadoya for presentation to his lordship, the late lay monk of Samyoji. This I did solely that I might repay the debt of gratitude that I owe to my native land. The essence of my work, the Rissho Ankoku Ron, is as follows. Long ago, it was said that this country of Japan would be ruled by 7 heavenly deities, 5 earthly deities, and 100 kings, reigning one after another in succession. During the reign of Emperor Kinmei, the 13th of the human sovereigns, Buddhism was for the first time brought to Japan from the kingdom of Pakche. From that time until the reign of Emperor Kamu, a period of some 260 years that saw the reigns of 20 or more sovereigns, all the various Buddhist scriptures were brought to Japan, as well as the 6 sects of Buddhism. At this time, however, the Tendai and Shingon sects had not yet been introduced. During the reign of Emperor Kamu, there was a young monk named Saicho who was a disciple of priest Gyoho of Yamashina Temple. He later came to be known by the title Great Teacher Denyo. He made a thorough study of the 6 sects that had been introduced to Japan earlier, as well as the Zen sect, but none of these seemed to satisfy him. Some 40 years earlier, in the reign of Emperor Shomu, a Chinese monk named Ganjin had come to Japan and brought with him the commentaries of the great teacher Tiantai. When Saicho read these, he for the first time came to understand in essence the true meaning of Buddhism. In the 4th year of the Enryaku era, 785, Saicho founded a temple on Mount Hiei in order to ensure the continuance of peace in heaven and on earth. Emperor Kamu paid honor to the new establishment, designating it as a place of worship where prayers should be offered to the guardian star of the ruler. He ceased to heed the teachings of the 6 sects, and instead gave wholehearted allegiance to the perfect doctrines of the Tendai sect. In the 13th year of the Enryaku era, 794, the emperor moved the capital from Nagaoka to the city of Heian. In the 21st year of the same era, that's 802, on the 19th day of the 1st month, the emperor summoned 14 learned scholars of the 6 sects from the 7 great temples of Nara, including such monks as Gonso and Choyo, to the temple called Takaodera, and ordered them to engage Saicho in debate. These enlightened masters of the 6 sects were not able to hold their own against Saicho for even a single exchange of opinions, but shut their mouths so tightly one might have mistaken them for noses. The 5 teachings of the Kegon sect, the 3 periods of the Hoso sect, and the 2 storehouses and 3 eras propounded by the Sanran sect, all of these doctrines were demolished by Saicho. The doctrines of the six sects were not only refuted, but in fact served to reveal that the other debaters were all guilty of slandering the law. On the 29th day of the same month, the emperor handed down an edict criticizing the 14 monks who had opposed Saicho. The 14 monks in turn drew up a letter apologizing for their conduct and submitted it to the emperor. Thereafter, one sovereign after another paid allegiance to Mount Hiei, treating it with even greater deference than a filial son shows towards his father and mother, regarding it with greater awe than the common people manifest before the might of the ruler. At times the rulers issued edicts to it, at other times they were obligated to give their approval to its unjust demands. We may note in particular that Emperor Seiwa was able to ascend the throne as a consequence of the powerful prayers of priest Enryo of Mount Hiei. The emperor's maternal grandfather, the Kujo minister of the right, for this reason submitted a written pledge of his fidelity to Mount Hiei. Minamoto no Yoritomo, the founder of the Kamakura shogunate, it will be recalled, was a descendant of the Emperor Seiwa. And yet the government authorities in Kamakura, though they may or may not be following the correct course in their administration, ignore and turn their backs on Mount Hiei. Have they no fear of the punishment of heaven? Later, in the time of the retired Emperor Gotoba, during the Kennen era, 1201 to 1204, there appeared two men, Honen and Dainichi, who in their arrogance believed that their understanding surpassed that of all the others. Their bodies were possessed by evil spirits, and they went about deluding the people of both high and low station throughout the country, until everyone had become a Nembutsu believer or else was hastened to join the Zen sect. Those who continued to pay respect to Mount Hiei became surprisingly few and lacking in ardor, and throughout the country the monks who were authorities on the Lotus Sutra or the Shingon teachings found themselves ignored and rejected. As a result, the deities Tensho Daijin, Hachiman, and the gods of the seven shrines of the Sana who guard and protect Mount Hiei, as well as the various other benevolent deities who protect the different parts of the nation, were no longer able to taste the flavor of the Dharma. Their power and brilliance waned, and they abandoned the country. Thus, the evil demons were able to gain access to the nation and to bring about disasters and calamities. These disasters, as I stated in my Rissho Ankoku Ron, were omens signifying that our country would in the end be destroyed by a foreign nation. Later, in the first year of the Bunei era, 1264, cyclical sign Kinoe Ne, on the 5th day of the 7th month, a comet appeared in the east, and its light shone over the whole country of Japan. This is an evil portent such as has never been seen before since the beginning of history. None of the authorities on the Buddhist scriptures or the secular writings could understand what had brought about such an ill omen. I became even more grieved and distressed. Now, 9 years after I presented my work, the Rissho Ankoku Ron, to the authorities, in the intercalary first month of this year, 1268, this letter has arrived from the great kingdom of the Mongols. The events that have occurred match the predictions made in my work as exactly as do the two halves of a tally. The Buddha left this prediction, saying, quote, "More than 100 years after my passing, a ruler known as the great King Ashoka will appear in the world and will spread my relics far and wide," end quote. In the reign of King Chao, the fourth ruler of the Chou dynasty, the grand historian Su Yu made this prediction, quote, 1,000 years from now, the teachings of the Buddha will be spread throughout this country, end quote. Crown Prince Shotoku predicted, quote, "After my death, when 200 years or more have passed, the city of Heian will be established in the province of Yamashiro," end quote. And the great teacher Tiantai predicted, quote, 200 years or more after my death, a person will be born in an eastern country who will spread my correct law, end quote. All of these predictions were fulfilled to the letter. When I, Nichiren, observed the great earthquake of the Shoka era and the great wind and famine that occurred in the same era, as well as the major outbreak of disease that took place in the first year of the Shogun era, I made a prediction saying, quote, "These are omens indicating that this country of ours will be destroyed by a foreign nation," end quote. I may seem to be congratulating myself on having made such a prediction, though in fact, of course, if our country should be destroyed, it would most certainly mean the destruction of the Buddhist teachings as well. The eminent Buddhist monks of our time seem to be of one mind with those who slander the law. In fact, they do not even understand the true meaning of the teachings of their own sect. It is certain that if they should receive an imperial command or instructions from the government authorities to offer prayers in an effort to avert the evils that beset the nation, they would only make the Buddhas and deities angrier than they are already, and then the nation could not help but face ruin. I, Nichiren, understand the steps that should be taken to remedy the situation. Other than the sage of Mount Hiei, I am the only person in all of Japan who does. Just as there are not two suns or two moons, so two sages are not to be found standing side by side. If these words of mine are false, then may I be punished by the 10 goddesses, the 10 daughters of the demon mother who protect this Lotus Sutra that I embrace. I say all this solely for the sake of the nation, for the sake of the law, and for the sake of others, not for my own sake. I will be calling upon you in person, and so I am informing you of this. If you do not heed my advice, you will surely regret it later. Respectfully, Nichiren. Bunei era, 5th year, 1268. Cyclical sign Tsuchinoe Tatsu, 4th month, 5th day. End of Rationale for the Rissho Ankoku Ron.